Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Stephanie Christopher. I am MDIC's Program Director for the Case for Quality, and it's my privilege today to welcome you to this second concurrent session. We've learned a lot today so far already, but we're excited to be able to share the tremendous year that the Case for Quality has had in 2017. And it's my privilege to introduce Beth Staub, who will be moderating our panel. And Beth is from Stryker, but we love her as a member of the board of MDIC and the chair for the MDIC Case for Quality Initiative. So Beth will give some brief remarks and introduce the rest of our panelists.
Thank you, Stephanie, and good afternoon, everybody. We're delighted to be with you today. I'm Beth Staub. I'm the Group Compliance Officer for Quality and Operations for Stryker Corporation. And as Stephanie said, I'm also lucky enough to sit on the board of directors for MDIC and be the board chair for the Case for Quality project. I'm going to start by saying we've got a tall order today in that we also had a similar panel to this one at the AdvaMed MedTech meeting in San Jose last week that was actually chaired by one of our panelists today, Luann Pendy. Luann actually got 2 standing ovations out of the audience. And her goal was to make sure that the folks in the other room heard that applause. Jeff Shuren, in that particular case, was the target of that applause. I'm not sure Jeff is still here.
We were cheering, so Jeff was here.
We're going to, I'm just going to ask you to keep that in mind at the end of the meeting today. We're going to want to get over the top on that one. So it's a tall order for me to engage you into that level. I'd like to just start by telling you how excited I am to be with you, and I think it's fair to say for the whole panel, about where we are with the Case for Quality, and in particular one of the 2 projects that is our flagship that we'll be talking about today, the Maturity Model Project. Can I start by asking, with a show of hands, who's familiar with Case for Quality and the Maturity Model Project? Okay, many of you. I hope when we're done here today, you'll have all the information you need to really be an ambassador for us on the project. If your firm has not yet enrolled, you'll come away with a good idea of why you should and how to go about it, and really a supporter for the principle behind the Case for Quality. So the Case for Quality really grew out of work that started collaboratively with the FDA back in 2011 with a vision of this when they first engaged with MDIC. Elevate the focus of all medical device stakeholders, from baseline regulatory compliance to sustained predictive practices that advance medical device quality and safety to achieve patient outcomes. It really ties to so many of the themes that we've heard around MDIC today and why MDIC is really the home agency for the work you're about to hear about. The goals, again, fit very closely with the MDIC model: tools, methods, metrics for innovators, manufacturers, regulators, and providers that produce better product quality and patient experience. And just a little bit of background for those of you who might be less familiar with the history. The FDA launched the Case for Quality Initiative in 2011 after a series of reports that they had engaged to help identify how a culture of compliance in medical devices wasn't necessarily always translating into good product quality. So there's a lot of regulated businesses out there, but in fact we're starting to feel like there in fact has been a decoupling of regulatory compliance and product quality in the medical device space. In 2014, MDIC was awarded a contract from the FDA to advance the Case of Quality by researching and piloting a maturity model project that could be applied to the industry and convening forums like this one today to get industry, hospital, patients, payers talking about what were the needs in this quality space and how we could work together to advance. And then in 2017, MDIC has continued to advance the Case for Quality by really focusing on 2 projects, particularly the maturity model one, and supporting the CDRH idea of a voluntary program for manufacturers that in fact could bring all this work together. So we have 2 projects that are really the flagship for MDIC's work. The first one is the one we'll spend our time talking about here today mostly, but it is the maturity model, the idea of developing a voluntary program, that's key, which leverages a standard maturity model, the one we selected is from a firm called CMMI, by which industry can measure their capacity to produce high-quality medical devices, and by which the FDA could then use that data to adjust their engagement activities around submission requirements, post-market activities, surveillance activities as recognition of the independent assessment of quality maturity. You'll hear Robin talk about this as almost a trusted trader, good housekeeping seal of approval, a partnership kind of arrangement. And what's exciting, and what you'll hear from Robin today, is a whole range of engagement activities by which both the industry and the FDA went here. The industry by understanding how, in fact, they can chart their own course to improve quality and business outcomes, but at the same time, the FDA can use that information to risk-base their activities and, in fact, expedite some activities for companies that they have trusted. The second project is just as exciting. It's a little earlier in its maturity, so we won't spend as much time talking about it today, but it's the Product Quality and Outcomes Analytics Group. If you happen to be in Washington when's our next forum, Stephanie? November 15th, you'll be hearing a bit about this one. It's developing an independent evaluation of product quality. If you think about everything we buy as consumers today, it's hard to think of almost anything where you don't go to an unbiased, typically web-based source to get reviews and information on the performance, the cost, the value of that product, right? You wouldn't buy your coffee maker that way. You wouldn't buy your car that way. But in fact, that's a very difficult thing to do in the medical device space today for both providers, for patients, as well as for hospital buying chains. So the idea here for this project is develop methods and proof of concept for a comparative dashboard that could provide information that could be used for understanding the relative value of quality performance, some transparency in that space. You can see the various parameters that group is looking at. So they're much earlier on. It's a daunting challenge, as you can imagine, to use both FDA-provided data. The work that's underway with NET could tie very nicely into this. But the whole idea is to start to get some standard language and terminology about the multiple dimensions of what represents quality in the medical device space. So it's an equally exciting project, as I mentioned earlier on. So today we'll spend most of our time talking about the maturity model project. Well, I'd like to introduce our panel. We've got a great mix of speakers here for you today. First up, Crouse, who is the Director of Quality for CVRx, a great supporter of the maturity model project, coming out of one of the more innovative spaces in medical devices. Luann Pendy on the end, the Senior VP of Global Quality and Regulatory for Medtronic. Merle Goddard from Baxter, Director of Global Quality. Newman, the Director of the Office of Compliance for CDRH. And Grossman, who is the Associate Director of the Science of Patient Input for FasterCures, one of the groups that we heard of from the patient perspective multiple times today. So Cynthia, I'd like to start with you. Could you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the patient space? How are patients thinking about companies and products today, and what kind of information are they looking for to be able to make sense of the multiple choices that they face as consumers of healthcare?
Thanks, Beth. So you already heard from FasterCures earlier, but just for those of you who either weren't there or are less familiar with our organization, we're a center of the Milken Institute, and we're aimed at working across the ecosystem to accelerate treatments, medical products, through R&D and into care delivery faster for patients. And we've worked for a number of years to put the patient's perspective at the center of that process because they bring the urgency and they're the experts. So you already heard from my colleague Kim McClary, our acting executive director, but I just want to clarify that we're not a patient organization, but we do work with a lot of patient organizations. We have a resource of about over 80 patient organizations that we work with. We've also directly surveyed patients through a PCORI Engagement Award where we talked to over 700 patients and caregivers as well as key opinion leaders in this space to try to understand kind of the landscape and how patients and caregivers interact with health data and interact with the health ecosystem. And so I think there's two trends that I kind of want to talk about, and one is a shift and one's not so much of a shift. The first is kind of this shift, and there's the larger shift of patient centricity across the ecosystem, but there's also this shift toward data sharing and kind of patients' perspectives and their involvement in both generating data, but then also trying to understand where that data goes in the system and how it's used. And we think that really there's a great push across the ecosystem to decide what data matters, not just to the ecosystem, but to the patient. You heard that in the earlier patient panel just before this, the breakout session. And so I think when you're thinking about a case for quality or value, making sure that the data aligns with what matters to patients is kind of at the crux of the challenge. But I think there's a lot of energy around that, and so the system is, I think, shifting toward that. But where the system isn't quite shifting is in trust and transparency, and that is that when we surveyed patients, most of them still really trust their provider and their healthcare system and those people tasked to take care of them and part of that care team, but they don't actually trust the companies involved in making the products that are going to benefit their lives, and they don't trust the insurance companies who help them pay for the products that are going to benefit their lives. So that sort of unevenness across the system of trust is a challenge, and we think that one of the challenges to trust is transparency or lack thereof. And that, in fact, bore out in our data. Many patients did not understand where their health care, despite wanting to share their health data and participate in the system, they didn't understand where it went in the system, who used it. That's a big black box. And so if they don't understand and they're making sort of assumptions, for example, many patients assume that you already share data as providers, as healthcare systems, and that any device implanted in them is actually able to be tracked, and that if there's a recall, they would know exactly which patients have that. And there's sort of a misunderstanding in the system. And so to the degree to which things like the dashboard can bring greater transparency, we think and hope that that will build trust over time. But to close, I think the general sense is that patients really want to, A, participate. Some will not, but many do. Patient organizations have built their capacity around participation, and so they're becoming even more sophisticated and able to participate. But the other side of the ecosystem has to kind of work out some of the transparencies and open up doors for participation.
And where do you see patients on that journey? Is there awareness of the lack of information in some of those spaces? Are they getting more sophisticated and being precise in what they're asking to see?
So I think you probably all have experienced this at various meetings. It's like an iceberg, and we're just seeing the tip, right? So those are the most engaged patients. And even amongst our 700 patients and caregivers that we surveyed, those folks are pretty well engaged. They came through patient registries. And so I think in terms of the readiness to engage, it's uneven across patient populations. But I think the problem is really that the ecosystem is set up to serve the disengaged patient. And what if we set it up to serve the engaged patient and then let people choose if they were going to be less engaged? But so I would hate for the argument to say if patients aren't ready to come to the table, then we shouldn't build the table for them. I think we need to set the table and let people who want to come, and people who are ready to come. And that's, I think, a shift that the ecosystem is starting to make.
Thanks, Cindy. Robin, when you look at some of the principles behind the two Case for Quality projects, analytics, making FDA data more public, and giving it to other people perhaps to use in databases, as well as the idea of a voluntary program where companies can share data willingly with the FDA, more transparency, following the theme from Cindy. It's pretty revolutionary. What would you say is the state of awareness within the agency that this is what the future looks like, and some of the changes that you see are necessary in the agency to be able to move forward in that space?
I think that's actually a great question, because you would think since it's sort of an FDA-initiated program or policy initially that everybody would be completely bought in. But I will tell you from the Office of Compliance perspective, one of the fears that people have is that if we speed, product to market faster, if we look at only patient concerns or patient desires around innovation and access, that we may make a mistake, that there may be, something will get through that isn't safe, or something will happen on the back end. And I can almost guarantee you that is sort of the nature of this business, isn't it? I mean, even with the very best controls around it, sometimes, we have products that get onto the market, and then once the product is in the wild and we see how it's performing, being prescribed for anyone, for any indication, in any population, et cetera, then you see things that you would not have seen in any sort of normal pre-market evaluation. So I will tell you that I think that the uptake is very high at the agency, more and more all the time, and I'm very, very excited about the uptake we're having with our partners through MDIC. Because what this is really doing, make no mistake, we are not watering down the world of compliance. What we're doing is moving the needle upstream. So by putting more emphasis on quality in terms of the robustness of the processes that manage the production, that manage the design, that manage the output, then we are having, I think, hopefully a higher probability of not having a problem in the downstream space. And I think in a world where patients are often informed more by what's in the newspaper than what may be actually true about a product, this becomes even more important. In a world where people have instant access at their fingertips to information that may be not correct, it becomes even more important then, I think, as an industry, that we do this needle movement, that we make sure we bulletproof this system as much as possible.
Great. And Al, the flip side of that, your firm was one of our pilot sites for the maturity model project. You volunteered to bring in the auditors as part of the process building exercise. Can you talk a little bit about what that dialogue looks like in terms of going back to your leadership and saying, hey, we're going to participate in a program, we're going to open the kimono, if you will, to the FDA and actually share some data about the status of our quality maturity? What kinds of reactions did you get to that?
I think first and foremost, when we talked about this at our site, usually when the FDA or our notified body comes in, we do a training for all our people that basically tells them, don't share more than you have to. Don't ask about anything that they don't ask about. When you've answered the question, stop talking. But this is more of a learning experience. And again, I think it's the basis of the CMMI assessment. It's more of a way of looking at things of what areas are you doing really well in and what areas do you have to improve upon. And it's a natural flowing conversation about how your systems are working, and does everybody at the company perceive those in the same manner that they're working well and doing what you want them to. And so it's quite a different environment, and I know the reaction, we actually let people from FDA listen in as well, and the things we heard back from Robin and Cisco and Sean was that there was quite the reaction on the part of the FDA inspectors that this was a totally different way of doing things and that they had more confidence in what we were and weren't doing correctly as opposed to just rote compliance.
Okay. Well, I know Baxter has some enrollment already in place for the next round of the maturity model pilot. Could you talk a little bit about why you chose to engage and what your thought process was for the selections of the sites that you enrolled?
Sure. Baxter is very involved in many of the working committees and groups here. There was great interest at Baxter because there's been a maturity model in place for 3 to 4 years now that is constantly being tweaked. You know, it has 27 quality system elements, and it's divided out into, 40 different criteria for each element, and there's 5 different levels, and, there's a certain amount of complexity to the sites do their own self-assessment every quarter. They get an independent cross-functional group that comes in and assesses them every year. If they're a little bit on the lower side of the scale, they get an in-person assessment. If they're a little bit moved up and along on the scale, then they can have a desk assessment or a WebEx kind of assessment, again, a cross-functional group. What we wanted to do at Baxter was learn together. We wanted to learn together with FDA. We wanted to understand whether the pathway that we're on for maturity model is in alignment with what our peers are thinking, our stakeholders are thinking. We want the definition of quality to be the same. We want to have the understanding of quality system elements and patient outcomes to be the same. So we decided to participate with 2 different sites, and we chose the 2 sites to be quite different. They're both mid-level on our maturity model. We didn't choose the highest ones, so we didn't choose the lowest ones. We did choose one site that has both devices and drugs because we thought in engaging in this model, whatever we learn about devices, we can perhaps apply more readily to the drug side because it's all within one site.
Mm-hmm.
The other site that we chose was very different. It's a renal therapy site that makes filters, and we wanted to understand how this maturity model and the learnings we get through this pilot are going to help us understand how to improve quality in a therapy type environment. So that's how we chose the two different sites. We're very excited to be part of this. The more we can be a part of the conversation, I think the more we're going to learn, the more we'll be able to develop everything together. What's the point of each of us developing our own systems and our own definitions and our own vocabulary when we could really do it all together and make the best possible outcome at once?
Yes, we have a question.
It's a question about your quality design.
Well, one sec, I'll ask you to wait till
We have people online.
Okay.
I'll ask later.
Okay.
No, go ahead. Well, let's mix it up here a little bit. Go ahead.
Okay. My question is, can you tell us a little bit about your quality system design? Is it centralized? Is it spread to the site?
So the quality system is actually centralized with decentralized elements. There's that movement from compliance to quality, where quality is a continuous improvement process that has hopefully breakthrough and transformative steps in it and global learning. So no matter what happens in the company, if it's a hold or a recall, we have, I think it's 48 hours to have all levels of the team know at all of the sites and have an understanding of how that impacts their particular business or their particular site. So it's very interesting to do that across 4 regions and, 65 sites or, how many countries, 130 geographies. It's fast. It's deployed very readily in a hierarchical fashion, but because of data being so available now and communication being so rapid, there is absolutely no reason why everyone can't do the learning immediately.
And that goes to one of the purposes of our pilot exercises is every company is set up differently, right? Some have totally centralized quality systems, some are local, some have multiple things within one facility. So we're trying to get a sense of how that might work out. Luann, you've been involved in the case for quality since the very early days. Many of you may have seen the video that she's recorded as really, truly one of our
made me famous.
one of the really first ambassadors for the program. First, could you talk a little bit about how you've seen the dialogue around quality and compliance shift, perhaps, since the case for quality has been initiated?
Well, one of the things that happened early on was through a bunch of information and data that was collected, we realized, industry and FDA, that compliance and quality were entirely different things. And doing inspections all based on compliance wasn't actually improving product quality. Product quality seemed to be getting worse, even though the compliance activities were escalating. And so I think we all understand this, that you can have good compliance and poor quality, but you also need good compliance to have good sustainable quality. So they go hand in hand, but to investigate for one and not the other seems to make it a little lopsided. And so what has happened, actually, and it comes back to some of the comments that Cynthia made, it bothers us in the device industry that we're not totally trusted by the patient. That's very bothersome to us. Because we feel that we're very trustworthy, and the mission that we have is for patients. Totally, FDA, industry, it's our mission for better patient outcomes. So I feel like as we swing the pendulum the other way to focus more on product quality, but also keeping compliance in mind. That's the way that we go. Don't tell anyone. But as I look across Medtronic, there are sites that need to improve in their compliance. If anyone from FDA is here. But I think that the compliance, and you'll find that all over the industry, there are sites that need to improve. They may be new. They may be acquisitions. They may have funded in different ways because they're making their new products. That's all good. Right now, we have, many of us have plants in Puerto Rico. And as we bring those plants up, they are high-quality plants, highly mature quality systems before the hurricane. But as we bring those plants up, we will be doing a double click on compliance as they do their validations and things like that. They'll get back to their quality maturity models that we expect them to be. But what I'm saying is that across the industry, across companies, you'll find some that are high in compliance, low in compliance, and it's the work for all of us as the heads of quality to do that. Back to the trust thing, the maturity model, I feel, is going to be our way as a medical products industry to gain the trust of patients and providers. The only information that comes out about medical device manufacturers is the bad information. The only information is the warning letters that we have, which are bad marks against our compliance, field corrective actions, recalls, et cetera. And I believe that we as an industry might use the maturity model to elevate the opinion and the trust in our industry.
Sure. Robin, could you talk a little bit about what the agency will get from this data that you don't get from your traditional inspections, and then some of the incentives that you're thinking you can offer for these trusted companies to participate?
Okay, so the thing you need to remember, it's those of you that aren't as familiar with it, is that this is not an audit. So having a maturity model assessment tells you about your capabilities as an organization. How able are you to respond to problems in your environment? How quickly can you solve problems? What kind of feedback loops do you have, et cetera? So how do you engage in continuous quality improvement? There's no best score, I guess, or worst score in this first pass. There may be companies that come out and they're going to score a 2 out of 5. That's not a bad thing. That tells you where you are today. It gives you information and allows you to kind of put your feet on the path and start doing the things that you will be advised to do. So that's how it works. So the way that the agency has been looking at this is this is so important to us, and we think that this is really the needle mover, if you will, in terms of making the difference. So in order to encourage companies to engage with us in this pilot, we thought of several things that we can do. And one of the things we had to do first is understand what your real costs are and understand some of the things that are just pain points for organizations. So one of the things we might think about is 30-day notices. We took a look at this and we did some questioning, and we found out about how much time it takes for most companies to do the 30-day notice process, not just the 30 days, but all the regulatory time and things that go into the background of this. And what we discovered, which really surprised us, I think, but as I think about it, it shouldn't have for me because I came from industry, is that companies were actually not making innovative changes to their products because they were so bogged down in just sort of standard routine activities. So one of the things that we believe that we can do is sort of revise that process significantly so it's not burdensome, so it's easy to do, so that it doesn't take a lot of time or a lot of money. So that's one of the places we think we could get. Site changes. If you're an organization that, your ticket to ride in this, by the way, is that you've had a clean audit, and clean by I mean at least VAI within the last 4 years, okay? So if you're going to do a site change in your organization that we trust, this can also become a much simpler process for you than it currently is. So we're looking at a number of things along those lines that we know are very expensive. One of the things we'll do is take you off the risk-based work plan, which means that routine audits for your facility will no longer be conducted while you're participating in the pilot. Now, what we learned in that is the average cost per day for doing an audit is about $15,000, and that's not including the opportunity cost for all those people that are sitting in the back room. So, and all the stuff that's not happening while you're all standing there.
You know they're really back there, huh?
Yeah, I'm in there. Exactly. Right? So if you think about that, if you're like and I think, Luann, you had a large number for the number of audits that your organization.
300 audits a year at Medtronic.
Oh my goodness. So imagine if they were at $15,000 a day, what that could mean if we took some of those sites off of the risk-based work plan. And what we're getting in exchange for that is the company is actually giving information to the agency. We don't see your whole report. but there is sort of a dashboard that comes where we can see how basically you're doing. And then over time, we can do pulse checks to see that the company is engaging in continuous quality improvement and making the maturity changes that they need to make in their system as it begins to grow. And the agency then basically has confidence in you. So this is about trustworthiness. That's what this really comes down to. So our confidence goes up. We don't have to worry about you. Even if you were to have a problem, and you will, every company does, to Luann's point, you have different sites at different levels. But we know you've got this because you understand what needs to happen and you can adjust to it. So unless there's some major signal in the environment, which of course we would have to respond to, as we usually do, this is one of the things. So we're also looking at things we can do in the recall space. We're looking at things, changes we might make, around, if there is a problem, instead of going to a warning letter, because you're on the trusted company list, maybe we'll take a less draconian regulatory pathway with you initially and just go, we'll have a meeting. We'll talk about this. You come to me with a robust plan. We feel comfortable that you can execute on that plan. Then we may not end up in that space. So all of these are possibilities, and there are more, but this is sort of in a nutshell some of the things we think we can do in exchange for participating in case for quality.
And Cindy, listening to that and putting yourself in the seat of the patient who may not have good transparency today, what do you think will be the reaction to a program like that and the idea that a company is willingly submitting themselves to participate?
Yeah, well, I mean, I actually would put that question to all of us, because patients are people too, right? Mm-hmm. And so in sitting here thinking about it, I was thinking of two things. One has to do with risk and who takes on the risk. And so I understand that there's a lot of risk involved, and you all understand that much more than I do on some level. But when there's a lack of information, a lack of transparency on the patient side, it's the patient that takes the risk, or at least they perceive it, because they don't know. Maybe they're taking a risk, maybe they're not, but they feel it acutely, as you would if you were in that situation, or maybe some of you have been. And so I think that idea of transparency to both and elimination of the risk, the upstream or sooner, earlier risk, is really critical. And I think that would be well received by anybody. It's a good idea to do. But the other piece had to do with the fact that, as I was listening to the way that companies are approaching this, from an internal standpoint, I was thinking, gosh, that's the same kinds of things that patients want to be able to do with the system and their information. For example, they want feedback loops. They want to understand, as the system learns about them, how they can help engage with the system to better their care. They want to be able to do some self-monitoring, some self-tracking. So, gosh, you probably have people in your company who would like to be able to do that for themselves or their department, and this system sounds like it's trying to get at some of that. And so it was sort of reflected to me that some of the same things that people want out of their engagement with the system externally are some of the things that this program sounds like it's trying to work within companies internally. And I think that any way to, you don't want to let the cat out of the bag too soon, but any way to sort of preview that for patient communities, for patient organizations that you work with, that you're already engaged with. I think making sure that you educate them along the way as you participate in this program, if that's possible, just to let them know, I think that would be really helpful, and people would enjoy hearing about that, at least on the patient organization level, even if not an individual patient.
Merle, we heard from Luann what a busy time it is to be in the audit management business at a medical device firm, and Baxter certainly is another large player in that space. So there's a ton of other regulatory programs going on today that are eating up resources in that space. MDIC, EU MDR, more and more individual countries, despite global harmonization, launching their own audit programs. What would you say is the reason that Baxter feels this is a good investment? Of all the places you can put your quality improvement dollars, why are you picking this, despite the fact that you're going to have lots of other auditors coming in to visit?
Baxter doesn't think of this as an audit-type program. All right, this is something that we're doing to help demystify quality assurance. It's really about having the quality system element owners, the people who are the subject matter experts, really deeply know all of the regulations across all of the lands, to be able to organize their thoughts as to how do you perceive level 1 versus a high level 5, as to how do you get better with quality. Thinking of it as level 3 is meeting all regulations and all your policies and all your procedures. But what is it above and beyond that? So it is about transparency. It is about learning. It's about continuous improvement. And it's about conversation, training, demystifying. It's not part of the audit program at all. It's an assessment program that we go through that helps train people, that helps involve multifunctional groups in conversations they wouldn't maybe normally have. It's to have the design people and the supply chain people and the quality people and the manufacturing and the engineers come together to talk about certain quality elements and how what they do impacts it, and how they can think beyond one quality system element to understand the interactions between them all, to be able to understand trends in interactions, which is very, very important to do. It's not just about one single quality element anymore and how well it is. It's really about the interactions between them in the quality system.
Very eloquently said. Alan and Luann?
Can I add a little bit to that, too? The other way I see this is that, when FDA comes in to inspect, it truly is an audit. And they may see something they don't like that you're doing, but all they can really tell you is you're not doing that well, and we don't like that. And there's a lot of times very specific information that they have that they're unable to share with us. Whereas this group of inspectors that's coming in has looked across not only medical device industries, but other industries and found best practices. And without necessarily being specific as to where they've found things, they can tell you ways that they've seen other companies do things that would improve your performance. So this is one of the few areas where I've seen where it's truly making a potential improvement to the quality of the product, whereas, as we've heard across the panel today, compliance may not do much for that.
It's like the base of the maturity model. The lowest level is compliance,
right.
And so that's how you get into the model. And there's only one way to go.
Well, there's none.
I'm an optimist. But one of the questions we were asked last week was, with all the programs that are going on, how do we as sponsors walk into the CEO, COO, CFO's office and say, I want you to fund this particular program? And it really comes down to a numbers game, so I'll help you out. This is how I think of it. It's almost the only way to manage our resources. I said earlier 300 inspections of global inspections, major global inspections for Medtronic. That doesn't include Kazakhstan and Ukraine, et cetera. 300 across the company. From an FDA perspective, 66, FDA MDSAP. So we latched on to MDSAP immediately so that we could start to reduce that number so that we're not a company running audits. And that's reduced it a bit, but it's still there. But we do view it also as continued improvement, as a way to improve the use of the resources, not only at Medtronic, but also at FDA, as Robin will tell you. I believe that a mature quality system is capable of finding issues, escalating issues, and fixing issues. An immature quality system just isn't going to provide that to us. And so when I think of quality, I can think of it in two ways. One is the value of quality versus the cost of quality. By that I mean cost of poor quality. The value of quality is tied into many things, but one that works predominantly for us in continuous improvement is the CAPA program. The CAPA program is a valuable program for finding issues and fixing them. We estimate at the company that a CAPA will cost between $50,000 and $100,000 to close. Okay, so a CAPA is $50,000 to $100,000. The cost of a 483, on the other hand, which oftentimes we have CAPAs open for those things, but the cost of a 483 we estimate is between $500,000 to $1.5 million. Okay, so if you're talking to your CFO and you tell him how many CAPAs you have, how many 483s and MAPRAs that they have, it becomes a cost savings opportunity to get involved in a maturity model, because it will teach us how to be more mature. Like you said, we'll know what are ways that we can improve. Not just that you're bad, but you're okay. better, and this is the way that you might do that. So if you start to do that cost of poor execution in your company, and you start to add up what we really pay, not just quality function, but what we pay in the company, those numbers start to rack up pretty quickly. And so we have to get better at quality. FDA understands that. They support us in this program is showing their direct level of support to us to get better at making higher quality products. And at the end, the costs will be a lot less.
I think Luann made a really good point I want to emphasize. This is also about letting the agency use our limited resources in the most efficient way possible. That way we're not spending our time doing audits for companies where if you're going to come out NAI or VAI, you probably have that. I mean, you can figure that out from a compliance perspective. So it allows us to take those really valuable and expensive resources and put them where they make a difference and not have to feel like we have to invest in things that are not value added for the American public. Because at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We want, safe, effective medical devices. We want happy customers, happy patients, et cetera, patients that are getting their needs met. And we define quality in the program as the way a product is experienced by the patient and the provider. So that the way the product is experienced. So quality, actually, that definition has nothing to do with compliance. Compliance is, it gets you in the door. Like I said, that tells you that you're basically following the rules.
Al, one of the things that I hear sometimes is, I get why Medtronic, a Baxter, a Stryker can and has the resources and would be interested in participating in a program like this. But I'm a mid-size, I'm a small size. Maybe my cost of implementation, my speed is easier because I have one or fewer sites. I don't have the horsepower to get behind a program like this. Being in that, newer company, innovative space, could you talk a little bit about why you think this is an important investment?
Yeah, first and foremost, I think it does, again, focus on the quality of the product, which is the main thing that we need to be concerned with. As I mentioned in an earlier MDIC meeting, most of the larger companies have multiple products, and as has been mentioned, we only get bad press, we don't get good press. And so if a small company gets bad press about their product because they have a significant quality issue, you may be doing well in your clinical studies, the product may be well used by 90% of the population, but if 10% of them are being injured, you're going to go out of business, regardless of the rest of it. So having insights into how you can do this right and how to do it better, are critical from that perspective. And again, the compliance audits aren't going to tell you. They're going to tell you that you're meeting that bare minimum threshold, but they're not really going to be focused on how you build a better product.
I would just add to that from the patient's perspective. We hear from, if you take PROs, for example, you hear that, patients want to be able to have data that applies to them, but that also helps them to sort of differentiate products. And so as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, I don't care if my product came from a big company or a small company. I just care that I know that these outcomes are comparable across products so that I can weigh which one is right for me at what time, and how that interacts with my current life and what kind of product what kind of outcomes I'm going to get as a patient. And so I think that's just to put the patient spin on that, I think that level setting for the patient in terms of the data that they have available at the point of care is critical, and we've heard that time again in our surveys and work.
There's also sort of a business decision around this as well, so that not every single system in your subsystem or whatever, in your QMS, may have to get to a level 5. You'll make a business decision about what is critical to quality for you. What are the most important things? And you can focus your energy and money around those things. So that the things that are less important to level 3 might be adequate. It means you're compliant, you're doing all the right things. If you have a really, really simple process, you don't make a really complex procedure to go with it. So I think that this is a real, there's an opportunity then to scale it, and that's the beauty of it. It's really kind of infinitely scalable in that way. If you're a small company and you're looking to be acquired, imagine what an amazing thing this could be in terms of a differentiator to be able to say, and yes, we're scoring a level 4 on the CMMI quality maturity model. So I think that that's another way to look at it for smaller companies. And the cost is actually about, I don't know, 2 days worth of audit, so just think about that. So it's really not as big an investment as you might think it is.
And I would agree with that. And I'd also say that we can't think of these elements as static either. You know, there's new and emerging things. Everybody's talking about the data and you know, high-speed data, continuous data, predictive analytics, everything to do with data. You've heard it all day long today. Well, the quality elements around the data that we're using to design, develop, and continuously improve our products, the criteria there needs to be continuously updated and changed. And so where you may put your money, where you may find the most value, maybe the systems with the most priority or the things that are most important to your product or how the patient uses your device. It could also be that there's new and emerging trends going on that you have to get in front of, and you have to determine what does this mean for the quality of the product, and what does it mean for the life of the patient, and how do we decide what criteria we have to think about in order to make sure we're ahead of that curve. So it's also good to get things moving a little faster, you know.
So one last question for the panel, and then we'll open up for some questions. So the maturity model project team has done a masterful job in taking this concept and getting it close to be ready to move into pilot, ultimately to be full-scale production. They're really at a critical point as we get ready to operationalize that and make it something that's consistent, try to provide data to the agency that, in fact, they think is consistent enough that they can start to provide some of those incentives we've heard about. I'd love to hear from any of you on the panel. If the maturity model team was here today, and we have Cisco Vincente, who's one of their advisors and participants, as we get ready to move into this latest phase of pilots and go live, any think-abouts for the team as we get ready to set this up as a scalable, successful, and program that really lives up to the expectations?
I would say, and thanks, Merle, for going through the logic behind Baxter's decision to do this, because we all need to understand that, and it's the same logic that we have to think for being clear about that. And the rest of us need to trust and be willing to change. One of the biggest comments I've made, well, it doesn't appear to be done yet. It doesn't appear to be all, if they're doing a pilot, it's not completed. And I would just say, just deal with that. It's a pilot. And I have a saying that I say frequently at the company, Confucius, better a diamond with a flaw than a pebble without. And so trust that this will work out. It's not perfect, and it will change over time. But let's go with the diamond and make it become a reality.
The other thing I would like to say, and I've expressed this to the group, is that we need to find a way to make this affordable for small companies. We will not have a whole lot of participation if it's expensive, and so we need to figure out how to a way to try and balance that. And again, the idea of MDIC is we bring up the entire industry. And while, we don't necessarily just want to shift costs to larger companies, can we as a whole figure out a better way to do that to support bringing the whole industry up?
I think part of it, too, is to start simple. And that allows everyone, I think, to have a basic understanding of what is the meaning behind the word that's used or the metrics that's used. And then how is that metric going to be used? I think that's one of the unsaid questions in the room probably is how is that metric going to be used to understand, how well that medical device is in the market and for the patient. And I think we need to answer that question. We need to be clear about what the questions are that we're asking, how we frame the metric, that we all understand the basics of what that vocabulary is that we're using, and then how will it be used, and how can we compare these very disparate products and companies, and, so those are important questions, I think.
And all of that's why it's a pilot.
Right.
That's right. Better a diamond with a
would say that no one likes change and no one likes risk, but people change and they take risks because they have to. And that's squarely the case for many, many, many patients. And so I think what we've seen in the ecosystem is just that as these patient voices have been elevated and their willingness to change and their willingness to take risks has empowered people and empowered the ecosystem to put them at the center, I would let that kind of fuel your efforts because you all are clearly aligned with the patient and bringing meaning and value to the patient and keeping that front and center as you embark on this effort.
And so I will close the circle on the trust comment. Recognize that trust is a two-way street. The agency is also, willing to say that we will trust you in this process. Your collaboration with us, your feedback to us, your transparency with us. So there's trust happening on both ends. And I think that that is a powerful and interesting place to be, someplace I never thought I would be when I was on the pointy end of the stick in industry. So I think that there's a real opportunity here around that topic and around that issue. And we are going to start small. We're going to start with manufacturing. We're not trying to boil the ocean. We're going to start in one space and see how that goes and test the model and see how it works out for us. But I have a lot of confidence, actually intuitively, that this is going to be very powerful. Very powerful. And the reason is we have some early successes. We have some data that demonstrate that companies are doing well. And if you think about industries that use this, like aerospace industry, where failure is catastrophic, why do they use this? They use it because it works. And so I can only imagine that it should be able to work for us.
Terrific. We have about 10 minutes or so left where you can take some questions from the audience. I'll just ask that you wait for the microphone from Stephanie for our web participants and introduce yourself.
Hi, Steve Silverman from AdvaMed. It seems like the pilot program will be a very effective structure to drive quality within companies and to drive quality across companies, but it seems less clear that the pilot program will permit patients and providers to make qualitative distinctions among competing devices. Would you agree with that statement?
That's an interesting point, Steve, and I appreciate you saying that. That's where the analytics piece comes in. So, who would have thought 5 years ago that hospitals, or 10 years ago anyway, that hospitals would be, competing on the basis of quality, that you'd be able to go and see a health grade for your doctor. But that's basically the kind of future I personally imagine. And those are the kind of data that will come, I think, from analytics.
So there are two programs that we're focusing on for Case for Quality, just to be clear. One is the maturity model, and then the second is the analytics. They're tied together, but they are distinct on two different pathways.
And they're both great examples, I'll say, right? The unique space that MDIC lives in as that public-private partnership, as a group that represents providers as well as patients, as well as industry and regulators. So our analytics team is staffed, while there are some industry members on it, there's a lot of supply chain people on it, a lot of hospital people on it, as well as some FDA people on it. So it is a really unique organization that way.
Yeah, so my question is a little bit of a follow-on to Steve's, but we didn't include just to make everyone comfortable. And I was wondering, I really like the idea about more transparency to patients, about companies and product quality. Have FDA and or MDIC, what discussions have you had around educating patients? Because if I look, you look at things from a patient perspective, intellectually you can accept the idea of, yes, it's high quality, but there's still risk. When the risk happens to you, your perspective might change. So it seems to me there's a level of understanding first by patients and patient organizations that nothing works perfectly all the time. And then they need to understand how they should be, what they should be looking for and how they should be interpreting what they're seeing if we're making this information transparent. How will that happen?
So I'll start and then I'll let my colleagues talk. So we're doing a lot of, as you know, patient engagement right now through the agency. And one of the statements when I talk to patient groups or groups that have a lot of patients, we talk about what is today and how this is different. And what is today is a system that relies on compliance in order to ensure that you have a high-quality product. Is that working? So the statement really is, imagine a different future where we have a different mechanism that drives quality in addition to compliance. They don't let go of compliance. That drives quality. Is that better? So I think a lot of this is really, we have to do this communication out to the patient. And I suspect that, especially as we go into the analytics piece, that industry, I think, and Luann, you said this, that there's an opportunity here for industry to say, hey, we're a level 4, we're a level 5. So I think that there's some opportunity for industry to actually let patients understand what that means too.
I would just say that I think MDIC, you all heard about sort of the patient-centered benefit risk and patient preference work that MDIC has been heavily involved in, and I would just underscore the fact that in order for patients to understand risk and benefit, they have to have the data that suggests and gives meaningful information about risk and benefit. So I think oftentimes we want to talk about risk as if we know as a system what the risk is, and I think there's some data gaps there that need to be filled for everyone.
Pat, I'll just add relative to the analytics team, it is one of the most daunting challenges they face, which is first coming up with those common definitions of the different dimensions of quality, and then trying to standardize the data to the point that we feel that we can start to share it and use it for decision making. Any of you who work for a firm that has multiple plants know how hard it is, even within your own 4 walls, to get a consistent set of, let's say, CAPA timeliness metrics. You would think it'd be the easiest thing in the world, but to get something right that you can really do apples to apples, very, very difficult to do. So they are in the early stages. They're thinking that their early work would be most useful, and that one is really driven by the supply chain people. Used primarily by hospitals for starters, and primarily around more innovative products. The sense is that the work that will go into that for maybe we'll call it more of a commodity kind of product that has a good body of evidence probably doesn't warrant the lift. It really is in these innovative spaces where the diamond, perhaps who has a bit of a flaw, if that's well understood, could be useful.
And just to add a little bit, Luann talked about the distinction between the analytics and the maturity model group. There is a scorecard that's going to come out around the maturity model. And part of the reason why, again, we're saying this is a pilot is we're not real clear how we would use that information. Would that be something that could be shared out in public? And, to Cindy's point, would that be understandable to patients if we shared? How do we, boil down that ocean to make something that makes sense to the patient that would tell them how to do it?
Just a comment on this discussion before I ask a question, and I'm the chair of ARM, which is involved in the analytics project. And the other thing that we're hoping hospitals will do is also start looking at this product works really well with patients presenting with this condition. And, otherwise you can use the more commodity type, if you will, and trying to get them to start to understand that is what we're trying to do with population health. Question I have, I'm very excited about the approach of this and optimistic about what it's going to deliver. I'm curious where you see perhaps some commonalities too. This reminds me of some legislation that I had worked on many, many, many years ago when I left healthcare and went into the oil and gas business. And it's called the State Audit and Privilege legislation, which is basically saying that if a company goes and looks at where it may be violating environmental laws. The problem was people weren't doing that because if they did, that data was against them. And so by doing this, if they found a problem, they reported it to the regulatory authorities, the state health department, have you, then they were not fined. And then they could come up with a solution and they could work on it together, and then that information then could be shared across the industry. And then regulators could focus on where there were problems, not focusing on everybody at large. I'm wondering if you think that this will, one, maybe increase more proactive work within the manufacturing environment, and how it might change the workload of the regulatory body.
I'll answer first and let Robin finish, because it definitely will help us make improvements within the company. So it definitely, because you know what improvement looks like.
And so philosophically, where we're going is, if you really want to encourage the behavior that we want to see, which is this proactive, self-correcting, feedback loop, then you have to provide the right incentives that encourages the behavior. And paddling is not typically the best incentive. So the idea is, can we find better incentives that really reinforce the right types of industry action, so that we don't have to go out and do an enforcement action. And telling on them is probably not the right pathway in that situation.
And what we get from maturity model, although we haven't specifically talked about using it in that way, is common language about what the issue is, what the gap is. Of course, the regulation gives you some of that, but it doesn't give you sort of that severity score. The regulation is sort of binary, right? It's subjective if you're trying to decide whether you're in or out. The whole idea behind a maturity model is, where are you? So you could see a world where you could potentially have a more comfortable conversation, because both parties are truly speaking the same language about what a gap may be. Yeah. One last question.
Sure. I'll try to be very quick, because I know we're at the end here. A quick comment and then a question to really more the firms. Talked about value and cost today. I feel like you're talking about the tip of the iceberg, though. When you're talking about $15,000 a day for an audit, or a 483 or a CAPA, that's the tip of the iceberg, right? I think for the firms to really sell this to the CEO and CFO, it's got to be about bigger value, top-line revenue. If I'm a smaller company, it's about attracting funding from investors. Or the large, you got two large companies right next to you, right? Or do you become a better acquisition target, as Robin mentioned. So, again, I think we're at the tip of the iceberg today. Can you comment perhaps on these other areas of value as you've talked to your C-suite? Have they recognized that? What kind of feedback did you get around these other areas of value?
All right, I'll start. One of the things that we really see value in this for is being able to predict issues, not only know when issues happen and self-identify and correct. What we want to be able to do is predict drift, all right? We want to see trends before anything actually happens to release product. So what we want to do is self-correct the system before we have to do any corrections to the product, all right? So it's all about getting ahead of the curve by being able to see, truly see where you are. All right, and that, believe me, is cost saving, right? You're not going to have.
I think that's an eloquent answer. I think we'll break it there to respect your break. Let's have a rousing round of applause.
And Beth, if you want to show the next slide.
Yep.
There are still lots of opportunities to engage in the case for quality, and if you are interested in engaging with us and being a part of this awesome team looking to really change the industry and change the FDA, come talk to Beth or to me or to Cisco or Robin or any one of us. There's still opportunities to get involved.
Thank you all.